At my law school graduation, my father stood up and called me a disappointment who would never amount to anything in politics because I chose public service over corporate law. My mother sat silent, too embarrassed to defend me, while my siblings avoided eye contact. 10 years later, I walked into the cabinet room as the newly appointed White House Chief of Staff, and when the Secretary of Defense saw me, he immediately stood and bowed deeply. "Madam Chief of Staff." The moment my family saw that footage on every major news network. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Watching one of the most powerful officials in America show me that level of respect. That was when they finally understood what I'd been building all along. My name is Rebecca Harrison, and I was born into a family that believed politics was a corrupt game for people who couldn't make it in legitimate business. But that's not the whole story. The first time I mentioned wanting to work in government, I was 13. My father, managing partner at one of the nation's most prestigious law firms, looked at me like I'd announced plans to join a carnival. "Smart girls don't waste their talents on political theater," he said, straightening his platinum cufflinks. "Politics is for people who can't succeed in real law practice." My mother, who'd abandoned her own legal career to manage charity boards, nodded emphatically. "Rebecca, sweetheart, government work is for people from ordinary families. We build legal empires, we don't serve them." They had mapped out my entire future. Corporate law at Dad's firm, like my older sister Amanda was destined to do. Maybe federal judiciary eventually, like Uncle Richard. Definitely something that would impress at state bar conferences and legal society galas. When colleagues asked about their children, they'd beam discussing Amanda's law review achievements and my younger brother Michael's pre-law honors program. But when it came to my interest in public policy, they'd quickly steer the conversation elsewhere. Outside our mansion, their legal elite circle shared the same contempt for government service. The Bancrofts next door, the Sterlings from the Judicial Club, the Washingtons who owned the city's largest corporate law practice. They all treated their children's private sector achievements like Supreme Court victories. High-billing careers meant successful parenting. Government salaries meant family failure. At prep school, I lived a contradiction. I was valedictorian, mock trial champion, and student body president. But at home, none of that mattered when weighed against my fixation on politics. My mother once said to her legal auxiliary, loud enough for me to hear, "Rebecca's brilliant, but she has this strange obsession with public service. We're hoping Harvard Law will cure her of these idealistic notions." I remember the night I brought home my acceptance to Georgetown's public policy program, like it was burned into my memory. Full academic scholarship to study government and international affairs, one of only 15 awarded that year. I was 17, holding what I thought was my golden ticket to everything I'd ever dreamed of. My father barely acknowledged it before setting it aside. "That's nice, sweetheart, but let's discuss serious law schools. I've already contacted the dean at Harvard about your admission." My mother tried a gentler but equally dismissive approach. "Darling, you don't understand what you'd be sacrificing. Government work pays nothing and offers no prestige. You'll spend your career begging for funding, while your law school classmates are building fortunes." She pulled out articles about government bureaucracy and political corruption. "Is this really what you want for your brilliant legal mind?" But I saw something entirely different in those policy program brochures. I saw public servants who dedicated their lives to shaping history and protecting democracy. I saw influence, purpose, and the power to change millions of lives. While my family saw limitations, I saw the opportunity to serve something greater than billable hours. Michael tried to be supportive, at least privately. "I think it's cool," he whispered one night when our parents were arguing downstairs about my stubbornness. But even he didn't really understand. "Maybe you could do government law? That way you could still make Dad proud." That's when I realized this wasn't just about career paths. This was about two fundamentally different definitions of success and meaning. At Georgetown, I thrived in ways my family couldn't comprehend. While they attended legal conferences and corporate retreats, I was studying constitutional law, analyzing political strategy, and interning at think tanks that shaped national policy. During holiday breaks, I'd return home with stories about briefing congressional staffers, or attending White House policy sessions, only to be met with polite disinterest and barely concealed disappointment. "That's interesting, dear," my mother would say, already redirecting to Amanda's latest corporate merger or Michael's mock trial victories. The contrast became increasingly painful each semester. At Georgetown, I was respected for my policy analysis and strategic thinking. I graduated magna cum laude, won the Dean's Award for Public Service Excellence, and earned recommendations from professors who'd served in previous administrations. My academic advisors saw potential for senior government roles, but at home, none of that translated into recognition. During my sophomore year, Amanda got engaged to a senior partner at a rival firm. The engagement party was a lavish affair at the country club, with 300 guests celebrating what my parents called a perfect merger of legal dynasties. When guests asked about me, my parents would mention I was studying policy, but never specified where or what kind. When I tried to share stories about my internship at the Heritage Foundation or my research on regulatory reform, the conversation would quickly shift to Amanda's billable hour records or Michael's law school prospects. "Rebecca's always been the idealistic one," my father would say with a strained smile. "Very principled." The word principled became their code for impractical and naive. Michael was caught in the middle, trying to bridge the growing gap. "Tell them about your constitutional law research," he'd whisper encouragingly. But when I mentioned Supreme Court precedents or legislative strategy, the room would fall silent, and someone would inevitably steer toward more profitable topics. I started noticing how they talked about other families with children in government service. When the Mitchell family's daughter joined the State Department, my parents would speak about her in pitying tones. "Such a waste of Harvard law," my mother would sigh. "She could have been making partner by now." When Judge Peterson's son visited our social events, they'd treat him politely but privately discuss his limited earning potential. Public service wasn't seen as honorable in their world. It was seen as career suicide, a failure to monetize elite education and connections. The breaking point came during my junior year. I'd been selected for a prestigious internship with the House Judiciary Committee, working directly with senior staff on constitutional issues. It was an incredible opportunity that could launch my career in government service. When I called home excited to share the news, my father's response was devastating. "Rebecca, we need to have a serious conversation about your future. This government fantasy has gone on long enough. I can still get you into Harvard Law School if you transfer programs next semester." "Dad, this isn't a fantasy. This is my career path." "Your career path?" His voice rose. "Playing politics with taxpayer money while real lawyers build practices? Rebecca, you're squandering every advantage we've given you." My mother took the phone, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, we're genuinely concerned about you. This obsession with government isn't healthy for someone with your background. Maybe you should speak with Dr. Patterson." That phrase haunted me. Not "maybe you should reconsider," or "help us understand your passion." Maybe I should speak with someone. As if my dedication to public service was a psychological disorder requiring professional intervention. That summer on Capitol Hill, surrounded by brilliant policymakers who dedicated their lives to shaping American law and protecting constitutional principles, I felt more at home than I ever had in my family's mansion. These people understood duty, strategy, and the weight of decisions that affected millions of lives. I was living two completely different realities, and I knew eventually I'd have to choose which one defined my future. My graduation from Georgetown should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. I finished first in my class, earned the prestigious Thornton Prize for Constitutional Studies, and had already secured a position as a junior policy analyst at the Department of Justice. The ceremony was held on a perfect May morning in Washington, D.C., with families from across the country celebrating their children's achievements in one of the nation's most respected policy programs. My family attended, but their presence felt more like a funeral than a celebration. While other parents beamed with pride, taking countless photos and wiping away tears of joy, mine sat rigidly in their seats. My father checked his phone throughout the ceremony, occasionally sighing audibly. My mother maintained a polite smile, but never applauded. Only Michael seemed genuinely excited, standing when my name was called for the Constitutional Law Award. After the ceremony, as families gathered for congratulatory photos and celebrations, I watched the Rodriguez family embrace their daughter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A new congressional aide, with overwhelming emotion. "We're so proud," her mother sobbed. "You're going to serve our democracy with honor." When I approached my family, my father's opening words were crushing. "Well, that's finished. Now you can move on to something that actually pays." "Dad, this isn't finished. This is just the beginning. I start at the Justice Department next month." My mother stepped forward, touching my arm with false sympathy. "Rebecca, you've proven whatever you needed to prove. You can still apply to law school this fall. Your father has connections at several top programs." That's when I realized they'd never seen my government career as legitimate. To them, Georgetown was an expensive 4-year civic engagement exercise, not preparation for a life of public service. They'd spent my entire education waiting for me to mature beyond this phase and join the family legal empire. The real devastation came that evening, at what should have been my celebration dinner. Instead of congratulating me, my family staged what could only be described as an intervention. My parents had reserved a private dining room at their exclusive club and invited Dr. Margaret Patterson, a family psychiatrist and longtime colleague. They'd also insisted Amanda and Michael attend, creating a circle of concerned faces all focused on redirecting me. "Rebecca," my father began, "we're here because we love you and we're deeply worried about your trajectory." Dr. Patterson leaned forward with clinical concern. "Your family has expressed concerns about your continued commitment to government service. They believe you might be using public sector work to avoid the challenges and responsibilities of private practice." I looked around the circle. Amanda avoided my eyes, clearly uncomfortable but compliant. Michael looked like he wanted to disappear. My mother was already emotional. "We think you're running away from your potential," my mother said through tears. "First to this policy school, now to government work that pays nothing. When will you stop avoiding reality and come home to build a real career?" "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm serving my country through the Department of Justice." My father's composure finally shattered. "Serving your country? Rebecca, you're wasting a world-class education while your siblings build substantial careers." Amanda just made junior partner. "Michael's been accepted to Yale Law School. What do you have to show for 4 years except a government job that pays less than our cleaning lady?" That's when I understood the full scope of their delusion. They genuinely believed that government service was inferior to private practice, even after I'd graduated from one of the most prestigious policy programs in America. Dr. Patterson spoke again. "Rebecca, your family worries that you're using government structure to avoid making independent decisions in the competitive legal marketplace." I stood up, my hands shaking with rage and disappointment. "Independent decisions? I've been analyzing constitutional law and shaping federal policy since I was 19 years old." The room fell completely silent. For the first time, I'd said out loud what we all knew. I didn't belong with people who saw my greatest achievement as my biggest failure. After walking out of that intervention, I didn't speak to my family for 9 months. I threw myself into my work at the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Policy, analyzing constitutional issues and drafting recommendations for senior officials. The work was intellectually rigorous and deeply meaningful. Everything my family said government service could never provide. But their words echoed in my mind during quiet moments. Wasting your education. Avoiding real challenges. Running from competitive practice. I began meticulously documenting everything, not because I planned to vindicate myself to them, but because I needed proof that I wasn't delusional about my capabilities. I saved every performance review, every commendation, every memo that reached the Attorney General's desk, with my analysis. My supervisory evaluations were exceptional. Ms. Harrison demonstrates extraordinary analytical capabilities and policy insight. Recommend for accelerated advancement track. Outstanding talent with unlimited potential for senior leadership roles. I kept these in a private file, evidence that contradicted my family's narrative about my wasted potential. During my rare calls with Michael, our conversations carefully danced around the obvious tension. "How's Washington treating you?" he'd ask cautiously. "I'm thriving, Michael. Making real policy decisions with real consequences." Mom asks about you sometimes. She worries you're isolated. Does she? Or does she worry that I'm too fulfilled to abandon this path? The silence always provided the answer. I learned through Michael that my parents had been telling their legal circle I was, quote, gaining government experience, and would likely transition to white-collar defense or regulatory law once I, quote, completed my public service phase. They'd even preserved my childhood bedroom exactly as I'd left it, as if my government career was an extended internship. Amanda visited me once in D.C. during a corporate legal conference. We met for dinner near DuPont Circle. She seemed genuinely curious about my work, asking about constitutional law and policy development. For a moment, I hoped maybe one family member might finally understand. The legal experience sounds valuable, she admitted. But Rebecca, don't you want financial security, partnership track, real influence, the ability to build something lasting? This government experience is admirable, but it's not sustainable long-term. Even Amanda, who I'd hoped might be different, saw my career as temporary, a character-building detour to outgrow rather than a calling to embrace. That conversation crystallized something crucial. My family's inability to accept my choices wasn't about concern for my well-being. It was about their own identity and worldview. Having a daughter in government service challenged their beliefs about success, prestige, and what constituted a worthwhile legal career. I began preparing for the possibility that this divide might become permanent. I established complete financial independence, separate from the family trust fund I'd never accessed anyway. I built relationships with mentors in government who became my chosen family, senior officials who understood dedication, public service, and the honor of working for something larger than profit margins. Deputy Attorney General Sarah Chen became particularly influential. She'd faced similar family pressure early in her career. Some families can't see beyond their own limitations, she told me during one of our mentoring sessions. Your responsibility isn't to make them understand. Your responsibility is to serve with excellence and let your achievements demonstrate your worth. I started keeping a journal, not about my family's rejection, but about my professional aspirations. I wanted to make Deputy Assistant Attorney General by 30. I wanted to specialize in constitutional law and regulatory policy. I wanted to serve in senior positions that would allow me to shape American jurisprudence and protect constitutional principles. For the first time, I was charting a future based entirely on my own vision, not my family's expectations. I was becoming the public servant I'd always envisioned myself being, even if it meant becoming unrecognizable to the people who'd raised me. The woman my family had tried to redirect was precisely who I was meant to become. 3 years into my government career, I achieved something that fundamentally changed everything. Appointment as Deputy Assistant Attorney General and assignment to the White House counsel's office. At 27, I was selected to serve as a senior legal advisor to the president, coordinating constitutional issues across the entire executive branch. The day I received the notification, I was in my Justice Department office analyzing Supreme Court precedents for an upcoming case. Deputy Attorney General Chen called me into her office, her expression serious, but her eyes radiating pride. Harrison, you've been selected for immediate appointment to the White House counsel's office. Your work on constitutional interpretation and executive authority caught the attention of some very important people in the West Wing. She handed me the appointment letter, and I read it twice before the magnitude sank in. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Rebecca Harrison, Special Counsel to the President for Constitutional Affairs, reporting directly to the White House counsel, a position that typically required a decade of experience, and I'd earned it in 3 years. For the first time since graduation, I felt compelled to contact my family. Surely this would prove that my career wasn't a phase or mistake. This was validation from the highest levels of American government that I belonged at the pinnacle of public service. This day is or Mr. of. I called Michael first. His excitement was genuine but mixed with confusion. Rebecca, that's incredible, but the White House? You're going to be working for the president? Michael, do you think Mom and Dad would want to know about this? There was a long pause. I think they should know. This sounds really important, even if I don't fully understand what it means. I called home that evening, my heart racing as the phone rang. My mother answered, and her voice immediately brightened when she heard mine. Rebecca, Oh, sweetheart, it's so wonderful to hear from you. We've missed you terribly. Mom, I have significant news. Career-changing news. Are you finally ready to transition to private practice? Have you decided to apply to law firms? No, Mom. I've been appointed Deputy Assistant Attorney General and assigned to the White House Counsel's office. I'm going to be advising the President on constitutional law. The silence stretched endlessly. I could hear her breathing but no words. Mom? The White House? Her voice was strained. Rebecca, that sounds political. Are you sure this is making you happy? When my father took the phone, his response was even more deflating. White House counsel? What does that actually translate to in terms of real legal career advancement? Can you leverage that government experience into corporate partnerships when you're ready to be serious? They couldn't even acknowledge my achievement without immediately searching for an exit strategy. That weekend, I walked through the West Wing for the first time as a staff member. Security cleared me through multiple checkpoints, and I felt a profound sense of purpose as I passed the Roosevelt Room and approached the Oval Office where I'd soon be briefing the President on constitutional matters. I called Deputy Attorney General Chen, who'd become my closest mentor. Sarah, I think I need to accept that my family will never understand this world. Rebecca, some families can't recognize greatness because they're blinded by convention. But your government family sees it. Your colleagues see it. The President's senior staff sees it. That's what matters. She was absolutely right. The federal government had become my real family. My fellow public servants celebrated my achievements without reservation. My supervisors invested in my development because they recognized my potential for senior leadership. The institution itself had embraced me completely. Moving my office to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building felt like arriving at my true destination. My workspace was modest but significant, steps away from the corridors of power, where decisions affecting the entire nation were made daily. I sent my family a photo from the White House Correspondents' Dinner, working in the West Wing now, finally where I belong. My mother's response came 2 weeks later. We're keeping your room ready for when you're finished with this political phase. I filed that letter away. There would be no finishing because this political phase was my real-life beginning. The call came at 5:30 a.m. during my second month at the White House. Michael's voice was shaking through the secure line, cutting through the sound of early morning D.C. traffic as I prepared for the President's daily intelligence briefing. Rebecca, something's happened to Dad. He's had a severe panic attack and chest pains. He's in the ICU. The doctors think it's stress-related cardiac symptoms. Mom says it's because you're working so close to dangerous political situations. I was scheduled to brief the President on constitutional challenges in 30 minutes, but the familiar weight of family guilt crashed over me. Despite everything, he was still my father, and somehow my White House position was being blamed for his health crisis. How serious is his condition? I asked, checking my watch and knowing I had critical legal briefings to prepare. Serious enough that he can't work. The doctors are discussing extended medical leave. Mom's beside herself, and she's blaming your White House assignment for pushing him over the edge. When I managed to reach my mother later that day, her voice was filled with barely controlled hysteria. Rebecca, your father hasn't slept since you moved to the White House. He lies awake every night, terrified you'll get caught up in some political scandal or assassination attempt. Mom, I'm providing constitutional legal advice. I'm not in physical danger. Constitutional advice? Her voice escalated. You're in the middle of political warfare. Your father is terrified you'll be destroyed by partisan attacks, and will watch our daughter's reputation ruined on national television. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent briefing request from the White House counsel, and I had to end the call to coordinate legal strategy for an emerging constitutional crisis. When I called back hours later, my father was on the line, his voice weak and filled with distress. Rebecca, I need you to resign from the White House. I need you to come back to private practice before this family completely falls apart. Dad, I can't abandon my constitutional responsibilities to the President. Your responsibilities? His voice cracked with emotion and anger. What about your responsibilities to the family that raised you and invested in your education? Is politics more important than your own parents? That's when my mother reclaimed the phone. Rebecca, Dr. Williams says your father's condition is directly related to political stress. If something happens to him while you're playing presidential advisor, how will you live with yourself? The manipulation was staggering. They'd weaponized my father's anxiety about my political position, transforming his inability to understand my career into a medical emergency for which I was responsible. 3 weeks later, the situation escalated dramatically. I received an official message through the White House Personnel Office that my family had contacted the Secret Service, claiming I was needed for a family emergency, and requesting my immediate removal from White House duties. White House counsel Robert Martinez called me into his office, which overlooked the South Lawn's manicured grounds. "Harrison, I've received some highly unusual requests from your family through official security channels. They're claiming your father's health crisis requires your immediate resignation and suggesting that your White House assignment is causing severe psychological distress to family members." I stared at him, realizing the full scope of their interference. "Sir, my family disapproves of my political career and is attempting to force me to abandon my White House responsibilities." "That's an extremely serious accusation, Rebecca." "Yes, sir, it is." He studied my performance evaluations, then looked up. "Your work has been exemplary. Your constitutional analysis has been invaluable to the president, and your legal guidance has prevented several potential crises. But these family interventions through security channels create significant complications." The investigation that followed was conducted while I continued coordinating critical constitutional issues. White House security personnel interviewed me extensively. My personal stability was questioned. My commitment to public service was scrutinized. All because my family had decided that if they couldn't convince me to leave government, they'd make the government question my fitness for White House duty. 6 months into my White House assignment, the warfare against my career became systematic and reached into the highest levels of government. It started with subtle interference I initially dismissed as family desperation. My security clearance renewal faced unusual delays. Questions were raised about my family's stability during routine background checks. Then I discovered the devastating scope of their campaign. My deputy counsel, James Rodriguez, pulled me aside after a successful constitutional briefing with cabinet secretaries. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something uncomfortable. Someone claiming to be your mother has been contacting congressional offices, suggesting you've been showing signs of psychological instability while working at the White House." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of contacts?" "She reached out to the House Judiciary Committee's chief counsel claiming you'd been writing concerning memos about constitutional crises, and that your White House assignment was compromising your mental health. She suggested Congress should investigate your fitness for executive branch service." I sat in my West Wing office that night, reviewing classified constitutional analysis while processing the reality that my family was actively sabotaging my White House career through congressional channels. The attacks escalated rapidly. Michael called me through official White House communications 2 weeks later, his voice filled with anguish and fear. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. They forced me to do something terrible." "What did they make you do?" "Mom and Dad threatened to disown me and destroy my law school prospects if I didn't write a letter to the White House Personnel Security Office. They made me say I was worried about your mental state, that you'd been writing disturbing things about presidential powers and seemed unstable working so close to political conflicts." My hands trembled as I ended the call. My own brother had been coerced into filing false reports about my fitness for White House duty through official security channels. The following morning, White House counsel Martinez summoned me to his secure conference room. He was a seasoned government attorney who'd always supported my constitutional work, but his expression was deeply troubled. "Harrison, I've received multiple concerning reports about your personal situation through both congressional and security channels. Family members expressing worry about your psychological state, claims that White House pressure has made you unfit for executive branch service. Sir, those reports are completely fabricated. My family is attempting to force me out of the White House by undermining my fitness for constitutional duties." "That's an extraordinarily serious accusation, Rebecca." "Yes, sir, and it's happening while I'm successfully coordinating critical constitutional issues for the president." He studied my performance reports and presidential commendations, then looked up. "Your legal analysis has been exceptional. The president specifically relies on your constitutional guidance during crises. But these family concerns create complications for your security clearance and White House access." The investigation that followed was conducted while I continued managing sensitive constitutional matters. White House security specialists evaluated me extensively. My personal relationships were scrutinized. My commitment to presidential service was questioned. All because my family had decided that if they couldn't convince me to leave the White House, they'd make the White House want me to leave. But I had powerful allies fighting for me. Deputy Attorney General Chen, now working closely with the White House, connected me with the Office of White House Counsel's Ethics Division. This is more serious than personal family interference, the ethics attorney explained. When families weaponize congressional and security channels to undermine White House operations, it threatens executive branch functionality. Meanwhile, I learned my family had expanded their campaign across Washington. My mother had contacted Amanda's law firm, asking them to research legal methods for forcing White House staff to resign due to family emergencies. My father had reached out to family friends and lobbying, spreading concerns about my instability, and asking them to monitor my White House status. They'd transformed my constitutional service into a mental health crisis within their professional networks. At legal conferences and lobbying events, I became the cautionary tale about what happens when daughters choose White House service over family stability. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd contacted Michael's girlfriend, who worked for a congressional research office, trying to convince her that dating someone with a mentally unstable sister in the White House was professionally dangerous for her Capitol Hill career. The decision to expose my family's sabotage campaign came after they crossed a line that threatened the executive branch itself. My security liaison, Agent Sarah Kim from the Secret Service, approached me after a classified presidential briefing with information that changed everything. Ms. Harrison, your family contacted the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. They filed an official report claiming you've been compromised by political influences, and that your White House access represents a security risk to the president. My father had reached into federal law enforcement, attempting to convince the FBI that I was a security threat to the president, to destroy my White House career and constitutional responsibilities. I requested an immediate meeting with White House Chief of Staff Patricia Hayes. Her corner office overlooked the Rose Garden, walls lined with photos from decades of presidential service. Her expression was grave as I explained the full scope of my situation. Ms. Hayes, my family is conducting a systematic campaign to end my White House career through false accusations and federal interference. I have documentation of their coordinated efforts across multiple government channels. She reviewed my file, the White House counsel's legal analysis, and the timeline of federal incidents. After an hour of silence, she looked up with steely determination. Rebecca, what you're describing is an attack on executive branch integrity and presidential operations. This threatens White House security and cannot be tolerated. Hayes didn't just believe me. She launched an immediate administration-wide investigation. Within days, federal security specialists were interviewing personnel across multiple agencies. They discovered a pattern of false reports, coordinated timing, and clear evidence of malicious intent to undermine executive branch operations. The investigation revealed that my family had contacted 16 different federal offices, 7 congressional committees, and multiple personnel in sensitive White House positions. They'd created an extensive federal paper trail of fabricated concerns while never seeking legitimate professional help for their supposed worries about my mental health. White House legal counsel recommended we make the case public to prevent future incidents with other administration personnel. This sets a dangerous precedent, the chief legal officer explained. If families can sabotage White House careers through false federal reports, it undermines our entire executive branch security structure. We contacted David Martinez, a political journalist with Politico who specialized in White House affairs. When I spoke to him via secure video link from the West Wing, I felt the weight of ending my family's privacy on a national stage. This story transcends personal family conflict, David said after reviewing our documentation. This is about the vulnerability of White House personnel to domestic psychological warfare that can compromise presidential operations. The decision to go public wasn't easy. I spent 4 sleepless nights weighing the consequences while managing critical constitutional crises. Going public meant burning bridges permanently. It meant admitting to the world that my own family had tried to destroy my White House career. But it also meant protecting other administration personnel from similar attacks. The article published on a Monday morning. The headline read, "When Families Wage War on White House Careers, the Hidden Battle Facing Administration Personnel." Within hours, my secure communications exploded with messages from across the federal government. Fellow White House staff shared their own stories of family sabotage. Congressional liaisons reached out with support. Administration personnel told similar tales of families trying to force them out of government service through manufactured federal crises. One message stood out from Deputy Secretary Lisa Park. "Rebecca, my family attempted similar federal interference during my cabinet appointment process. You've given us all permission to speak about this abuse." But the response that mattered most came from Chief of Staff Hayes herself. "Rebecca, your courage in exposing this vulnerability has strengthened White House security and protected countless administration personnel. This exemplifies true public service." The White House's official response was swift and decisive. New protocols were established for handling family-initiated federal concerns about administration personnel. Security investigators received training on identifying coordinated false reporting across government channels. My fitness for White House duty was not only confirmed, but I was recommended for senior administration advancement. My family's reaction was predictable and nationally humiliating. 2 years after going public, my testimony before the House Oversight Committee changed federal personnel policy forever. Sitting at that witness table in my best suit, now wearing the title of Assistant to the President, I felt the weight of every government employee who'd been silenced by family sabotage. "Honorable Representatives," I began, "what happened to me represents a critical vulnerability in our federal workforce. When families can weaponize government channels to undermine administration personnel, we don't just lose individual employees, we compromise executive branch operations and threaten the continuity of democratic governance." Chairman Rodriguez leaned forward. "Ms. Harrison, how widespread is this problem within the federal government?" Since my story became public, over 700 federal employees have contacted me with similar experiences. Family interference with government careers represents a significant and underreported threat to our administrative capacity and national security. The hearing lasted 10 hours across 2 days. I presented documented cases from multiple agencies, policy recommendations developed by federal personnel experts, and testimony from other affected government employees. Congressional staff had prepared extensive exhibits showing the scope of the problem across different departments and security levels. During a particularly intense exchange, Congresswoman Thompson asked, "Ms. Harrison, what would you say to families who genuinely fear their children's involvement in high-level government service?" I looked directly into the cameras, knowing my testimony was being broadcast across all major networks. "I would say that federal service requires family support, not family sabotage. When families undermine their children's government careers, they're not protecting them. They're attacking the very institutions that preserve our democracy and constitutional order." The committee room, filled with federal employees and their families, erupted in sustained applause. 5 months later, President Chen signed the Federal Personnel Protection Act into law. The legislation created criminal penalties for intentional false reporting against government employees, established independent review processes for family-initiated federal concerns, and provided legal protection for administration personnel facing domestic interference. The signing ceremony was held in the Rose Garden, with hundreds of federal employees and their families in attendance. As President Chen handed me the signing pen, she said, "Rebecca Harrison, your courage has strengthened our government and protected thousands of dedicated public servants." But the most meaningful vindication came 7 months later. I was appointed as Deputy Chief of Staff, making me one of the youngest people ever to serve in senior White House leadership. The appointment ceremony was held in the Roosevelt Room, where I'd first learned the weight of constitutional responsibility. During the ceremony, White House Chief of Staff Hayes spoke words that healed years of family rejection. Deputy Chief of Staff Rebecca Harrison exemplifies public service excellence. Her leadership in constitutional affairs, her courage in exposing threats to federal personnel, and her unwavering dedication to democratic governance represent the highest ideals of administration service. The audience included cabinet secretaries, senior White House staff, and congressional leaders who'd worked on the legislation. But the person who mattered most was David Chen, my fellow government attorney and now my fiancé, standing in his Justice Department suit, with tears of pride in his eyes. After the ceremony, a young White House intern approached me nervously. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. My parents tried to get me removed from my internship last year, using similar tactics to your family. Because of your case and the new protections, the personnel office immediately recognized their false reports." That evening, David and I celebrated at our favorite restaurant in Georgetown. During dinner, he handed me an envelope that had been delivered through official White House channels. Inside was a letter from Michael, written on Yale Law School letterhead, where he now worked as a constitutional law professor. "Rebecca, I've spent 3 years studying constitutional law and federal administration, and I finally understand what our parents did to you was systematic governmental harassment. They tried to destroy your public service career because they couldn't control your choices. I was complicit in that harassment, and I'm deeply ashamed. Academia has taught me about service to constitutional ideals. You were serving our democracy while we were serving our own fears and prejudices. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm proud of who you became despite us, not because of us. I hope someday I can earn the right to be your brother again." I read the letter twice, emotions flooding through me that I'd kept buried for years. Anger, hurt, hope, and something that might have been the beginning of healing. Biduai I kept to be. 2 weeks later brought extraordinary news. The president's office called with a special request. They wanted me to lead a new task force developing policies to protect federal families from domestic interference across all government agencies. During the press conference announcing the task force, a journalist asked, "Do you regret exposing your family's actions?" I thought carefully before answering. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they couldn't see federal service as honorable. But I don't regret protecting other government employees from the same abuse. Sometimes, serving democracy means choosing your duty over your comfort. 6 years later, I stood in the cabinet room as the newly appointed White House Chief of Staff during the most critical administration briefing of my career. The room was filled with cabinet secretaries, the vice president, and senior advisors, all focused on an emerging constitutional crisis that required immediate executive action. David sat in the family gallery during the swearing-in ceremony earlier that day, our 5-year-old daughter Grace wearing a tiny replica of my professional outfit, complete with a miniature American flag pin. She'd insisted on matching Mama for the ceremony where I became the youngest chief of staff in modern American history. "Chief of Staff Harrison," the president said, turning to me as constitutional tensions filled the room. "We need your recommendations for our administrative response." The room fell completely silent. Every cabinet member, advisor, and official turned to me, waiting for my strategic analysis of a situation that could determine the course of American governance. "Madam President," I began, my voice steady and authoritative. "Based on our constitutional analysis and administrative capabilities, I recommend a coordinated 3-phase response." As I outlined the administration strategy, I caught a glimpse of the live news feed on one of the monitors. The coverage showed my family, for the first time in 6 years, watching the briefing from their living room, their faces reflecting shock, pride, and something that looked like understanding. The moment that changed everything came after the briefing concluded. Secretary of Defense Wilson approached me with formal respect. In front of the assembled leadership of American government, he bowed deeply. "Madam Chief of Staff, your constitutional guidance will be implemented across all departments." Outstanding leadership. Later that evening, as news coverage replayed across every major network, my secure phone rang. It was Michael, calling from Yale, where he now served as Dean of Constitutional Studies. "Rebecca, I watched the entire briefing with my constitutional law faculty. When the president turned to you for executive guidance, every professor stood up. One of them, a former Supreme Court clerk, said, 'That's what constitutional leadership looks like.' His voice broke with emotion. I finally understand what you were building all those years. It wasn't just a career, it was about becoming someone who could protect our democracy when it mattered most." We talked for 3 hours, sharing stories about our constitutional work and carefully rebuilding something that had been shattered for so long. He told me about his research on executive power and constitutional governance, how he'd started a program supporting government families dealing with public service pressures. "Working with federal families taught me what real constitutional service looks like," he admitted. "I wanted to understand the community I'd helped our family hurt. I'm sorry it took me so long to see your greatness. My parents hadn't made any public statements since my story broke nationally. According to Michael, they'd become increasingly isolated, clinging to their old prejudices while their children moved forward into lives they couldn't understand. Amanda had eventually reached out through Michael to apologize, admitting that my government success had forced her to question everything she'd believed about public versus private legal practice. 8 months after my appointment as Chief of Staff, I received news that would define the rest of my legacy. The President asked me to establish the National Public Service Family Institute, a new organization dedicated to strengthening support systems for government families and preventing the kind of interference I'd experienced. Our first initiative was a comprehensive support program for federal personnel facing family opposition to their government service. We provided counseling, legal protection, and advocacy services to ensure no public servant would face the isolation I'd experienced. The program's success exceeded all expectations. Within 4 years, we'd helped over 5,000 government families navigate conflicts between private expectations and public service. Many families learned to understand and support their children's federal careers for the first time. The moment that healed my deepest wounds came at our 4th annual Federal Family Unity Awards ceremony. As I stood at the podium in the Kennedy Center, recognizing outstanding government families, I saw movement near the entrance. My parents had quietly entered and taken seats in the back row. Damas? After the ceremony, they approached hesitantly. My father, now gray and bearing the weight of years, spoke first. Rebecca, we've spent 6 years watching your career from a distance. We were wrong, about everything. My mother's eyes were filled with tears. We thought we were protecting you from a lesser life. We didn't understand we were trying to prevent you from greatness. I looked at them, these people who'd raised me, but hadn't truly known me, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of reconciliation. I hope, my father continued, that someday you might let us try to be the parents you deserved, and the grandparents Grace deserves. That night, David and I walked through the Lincoln Memorial with Grace, past the words of presidents who dedicated their lives to preserving our democracy. Looking at those carved principles, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Katai, do you ever regret choosing this path? David asked, a question he'd posed many times over the years. Mandoter. I looked at the memorial, then at our daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms. I didn't choose this path despite my family's rejection, I said finally. I chose it because I believe some callings are worth any sacrifice. The legacy I'm most proud of isn't my position or achievements. It's the thousands of public servants who found the courage to serve authentically because someone finally showed them they didn't have to choose between family love and constitutional duty. Sometimes breaking generational patterns means accepting that not everyone will follow you into service. But someone has to lead the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.